Go.
Okay, welcome to this evening's program. I'm very sorry that I cannot be with you, but after reflection on my condition, I think it would be too much of a strain to get with you. I hope that you enjoy this format for Professor Cunningham's penultimate lecture. And I say penultimate because I may forget something, and so you'll have to come back for the next penultimate lecture, and so on. I want you to notice the photographs and certificates behind me. They trace my life ultimately to the Center for International Studies. On the top is my high school in Lancaster, California, Antelope Valley Joint Union High School. It was built in 2012, and I attended the centennial of it a few years ago. It was a handsome school. It's gone now. The buildings were not earthquake standards, built to earthquake standards, and so they tore it down. Next row, you find my service plaque for the Foreign Service, 32 years, plus 3 for Navy time, so altogether 36 years. In the center is a letter from Harry Truman that we all received, thanking us for our service in World War II. And it is a very touching letter. Perhaps Diana could get a photograph of it close up to display for you. The third is my service plaque at 30 years from the Center for International Studies. So that is the career that I will go over tonight. Not all of it. The bottom plaque is the one I'm proud of them all. But the bottom plaque is the first commission that I received in the Foreign Service from Dean Acheson, one of our distinguished Secretaries of State. It was a temporary appointment to a position in Sapporo. The appointment went with the position, not with the person. So when I finished work there in May of 1950, the plaque went with me, of course, but it was no longer valid any place else. I couldn't use it for signing. But I'm very proud that it was of that first commission in the Foreign Service Staff Corps. Okay, so that explains the introduction to this gathering. Now tonight, I plan to go over the reflections on a diplomatic career, some of which will apply here to my career in international studies at the University of St. Thomas. I'll begin with that portion of it. In about 1980, the 1980 annual conference of the Catholic Bishops of America, within the statement on Catholic higher education in the United States, included a small passage which I consider vital to our work. It was 1980. Our center was about to be established. There is a place, it says in part, for an international presence on the Catholic campus. That I considered very important because it was a charter, so to speak, the first time that the Catholic bishops had said something like that. I mentioned this statement to Father Theodore Hesper of Notre Dame when I saw him a few years later. And he said, well, I was at that conference, I helped draft the document, and he said, we thought it was time to put something about international studies in an official document of the church. That was very important timing because in March of 1981, Father Young, the president of the University of St. Thomas at the time, proclaimed issued this, denounced that the international studies would no longer be a part of the history department, but would it be its own organization. It would come out of international studies, and Tiller would be in charge the 1st of June, and it would be called a center and not a department because it would be so diverse in disciplines. It would have an array of liberal arts courses within the curriculum. The Ann Tiller took charge on 1st of June, and 37 days later she died suddenly of a rare hemorrhagic fever. About 2 weeks later, Dr. Bernhard, Virginia Bernhard, who succeeded Ann Tiller as the head of the history department, called a meeting and said, well, quo vadis, international studies, what shall we do? And she included in that meeting all of the representatives who had been on the International Studies Committee that Ann Tiller founded in 1972, one of her first acts on campus. They met. Dr. Philip Taylor, who was then leading the organization, contacted me in New York. I had not met him, but I had had a long conversation with him the previous November, October, when I was in Houston. So we knew one another, and he knew as I was a Foreign Service officer, and he knew that I was searching for some place to go after my retirement from the Foreign Service. I had not retired yet. Father Young, on study day of 1981, in the interim, I had been invited down for a visit to the campus, an introduction to the faculty, the search committee, and the chairman of the board of directors. So Father Young, on study day, the appointment was not complete, addressed the faculty as follows. There are many who wonder whether we should abandon international studies. We are not going to do that. We are not going to do that. And this building that Ann Tiller had prepared for International Studies, Center for International Studies, will propose to the board of directors that it approve naming the building in her memory. So that was I found that recently. It's a very interesting thing. It is interesting for you, Hans, for the future. Tiller Hall has the approval of the board of directors. Because the curriculum of Catholic universities is ordinarily philosophy, theology, English, drama, history, education, and so forth, international studies has always been a little bit different on our campus. And it pulls together these ideas, but in a different way, and tends to look at the world as a whole. Most of the others do not do that. So I feel it is unique, but I feel that it is also under watch, so to speak, always under watch. And I think that it behooves us all, students, advisory board, faculty, director to keep an eye over the shoulder to see whether anything is coming along. It would be now the students. Your careers, and this is particularly true these days. I have never seen a time when the United States was divesting itself, disarming itself of its soft power, which is built on personal relationships, which is built on knowledge, all the subjects that we study in international studies. There are people leaving the Department of State. It's a bonanza for universities who want to add these experts to their faculty. But it is a disaster, and I don't use that word lightly. A disaster for our country because we are losing power, and it will be hard to restore that. Not only losing respect in the world, but losing the knowledge, the contacts that are built up through diplomacy over the years. That's a memory bank that you cannot replace overnight. Someday we'll have to replace it. Someday we'll need to replace it. But it's going to take a long time to restore our position in the world. But you should not be discouraged. These people have to be replaced. You prepare for that. You are the hope of the future. And so your energy should be directed toward the broad field of what Professor Sindelar calls diplomacy, which includes not only the Department of State and its various agencies in Washington, but international organizations, commerce. We're still going to be trading with the rest of the world, I hope, and we need people to know how to do that with commerce, with international charitable organizations, with the United Nations and all of its agencies. There is a need for people and for Americans in those jobs. And if you are interested, if you are courageous enough to follow through in these hard times, then that is the place for you. And here I want to say, I had a vision when I was your age that I wanted to get into diplomacy. I'll tell you about that a little bit later. But it wasn't a goal which is specific and drawn out with detail. It was a goal, a vision, that there was something out there that was important and I wanted to be part of it. So that you have to capture that vision. I will not tell you where you will find it, where you will find your slot, but it will guide you toward the slot. And over the years, it will become clearer and clearer and more defined in your lives. So don't capture the vision first, and then define the goals. I'm sorry. And, oh yes, don't expect to make a lot of money in international studies, in the practice of it. But you will have enormous satisfaction in your lives. I found great satisfaction in the study of Chinese affairs, the Chinese language, Chinese history, Chinese culture, and so on. There is always more to learn, always more to learn. And some of it is directly applicable to what you are doing, and some of it is background, but it's all important. You have to be prepared for the unexpected. Now, one of the things that we were taught in my naval training was, suppose you're in charge of a ship on a moonlit night, on a calm sea. It's about 2 o'clock in the morning. You're standing the mid-watch. And nothing, you tend to drift off. Don't let your attention drift off. Be prepared for the unexpected. Suddenly a Russian submarine surfaces in your path. What do? There isn't time to call the deck captain or anybody else. Most of the crew is sleeping below. You're in charge. Do something. Don't do nothing, but act quickly. We were taught to imagine things like that when we were in our training, so that we would learn to be on guard, always alert to something that would happen. Unexpected, completely unexpected, unimaginable, but it would happen. You should be prepared for that. Also, something else very important that I learned in my first year of naval training. In October of 1944, I was transferred to the University of Mexico in our OTC unit. And it just so happened that we arrived a few days before the commander of the unit, Commander Daniels, Joseph Daniels, I'll never forget him, silver-haired man, was retiring. Now, it was rather unusual to retire at that time because everybody had served for the duration. I don't know the cause of Commander Daniels' retirement, but he addressed us in one of his retirement addresses, and he said to us, "You will hear a lot here about loyalty up the line. We hear a lot about it now from the administration, from the president. You know, loyalty, personal loyalty to him." He said, "Don't forget, loyalty down the line is just as important. Loyalty down the line to the very lowest ranks under your command is what will get you through difficult situations. Don't forget the ranks." And I never have. And I've found great satisfaction in promoting students like you and promoting the careers of others who have served with me but are under me, noticing their talents and asking to be, recommending them for promotion. And a lot of them have been, and they've gone farther than I did. So I'm pleased with that. And they remember it too. Do your homework. When I started to when I got first interested in diplomacy, it was at New Mexico, and it was in 1944. A professor gave a course in international relations, or broad course in international studies, survey course. And his name was Victor Clevin. He was rather a figure around campus. He was a graduate of Oxford. He'd been in the class behind Nancy Eden, who later became Foreign Minister of Great Britain, wartime Foreign Minister, Churchill's Foreign Minister. He always wore a three-piece suit off to the class with a necktie and his handkerchief tucked in his sleeve and a Homburg hat. And so he was a figure on campus. He was a very kind and open man. I asked him one day he gave a lecture on diplomacy. And after the class, I went up to him and I said, that was a very interesting lecture. How do I get in that kind of work? And he looked at me and said, well, you know, it's 1944. We made the Normandy landing, but there was a long way to go in the war. He said, when you finish college and you want to go to Georgetown University School of Foreign Service. That's the most famous, at that time, training training school for the Department of State. So I kept that in mind, and in I researched this, and I applied to Georgetown. I went there in 1947 when I finished my training, my service, and was put in the active reserve. And I went there, and they admitted me. And then a few weeks later, they called me into the registrar's office, and they said, "Well, you have 132 hours of undergraduate education. You don't have a degree, but you have 132 hours." They said, "We will accept 40 of them." That was really a crushing blow to me. A few weeks later, in a philosophy class, I had a run-in with the young professor, I imagine, hired by everybody. And in the logic class, he said that I had said something that he didn't like. So he insisted that I apologize to him. Well, I was a naval officer, and I'd been to sea, and I didn't think he had been to that kind of experience. So I refused. So he reduced my final grade by a full grade point average, and that added to the bitterness. So I decided to pull out of the university and go back to New Mexico, where I had all this credit, and they would honor the whole thing, probably only a few courses that were not in my elective. So I went back there, much to the disappointment of my parents, I finished my degree, and I didn't know what I was going to do. Somehow I wanted to work for the government. I figured I'd blown my chances of ever being an American diplomat, but the dean met me in the hall one day. He was someone who I had known earlier in my career there as a naval officer, or as a naval trainee rather. And he said to me, "What are you going to do?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. I'll graduate in January." And he said, "Well, why don't you do a master's degree?" I said, "Oh, Dean Reed, these master's students to walk around campus like they're the own whole place. Lords." I said, lording it over everybody. He said, "Oh, you could do it. I tell you what, if you will do it, I will see to it that you get a stipend, an assistantship of $2,000 a year." Whoa, that was a lot of money in those days. And I had my GI Bill eligibility also. So I went home. I said, "Well, let me think about that, Dean Reed." And I went home, and I told it to my roommate, and he said, Go back immediately. Tell him you take it, it's money." So I took his advice and went back and said, "Dean Reed, I'll accept the offer. Thank you very much for it." And then I continued to do a master's degree in my original major of government and public administration. Now, I finished the degree, but the point of doing your homework is somebody came through. He was a friend of the roommate of mine, and he was in the Department of State, and he was talking one evening about how he'd come back to marry his girlfriend, high school girlfriend. So he was in the Department of State, he was in the personnel section, and he was talking about how they had all kinds of promotion from within and all this sort of thing, hiring a lot of people and so forth. So my interest was revived, and I applied to him, for a job in the Department of State, and about 3 months later, everything was complete, and I went to Washington, and I went into the Department of State. They said, "Oh yes, we have your application here. It's on top of the stack. Everything's been approved. But we're not hiring now. And I found out later on that nobody was hiring because the government, the Congress, had not passed the appropriation, any appropriations. So I started out filling out, I went back to my rooming house, little portable typewriter, started filling out application forms, Form 57 for entry in the civil service, and started at the bottom of Pennsylvania Avenue and gradually worked my way up, and nobody was hiring. And then I got to the end of Constitution Avenue, Constitution 23rd, small building there, where the Atomic Energy Agency was located. And they said, well, we can use you. We just came through the appropriations. We were hiring people for Hanford, Washington. We're going to build a new town. We need people to fill the positions. $2,725 a month. No, $2,925 a month. So I went home and I found, I said, well, I'll let you know in the morning. It was late in the day. So I went home and there was a note for me that the Department of State had called. And so I called back to the number. Fortunately, somebody was there. They said, well, we finally got the appropriation. We're hiring people. We'll offer you $2,850 a year. I said, I'll take it. That was what I wanted to do. And so I took it. And then I entered the Foreign Service, went overseas, served in Prague, and I discovered that there was a difference in Foreign Service people. There was a Foreign Service staff, which they were hiring before, clerical, support staff, administrative, so forth, and there was the officer corps, which you're now familiar with the Foreign Service officer examination. Well, it was an operation then, and so you qualified to be a Foreign Service officer by taking this arduous examination. As a matter of fact, I think it's gotten more difficult than it was at that time. And there were other people in the embassy who said, well, you've got a master's degree, you've got a commission in the Navy, what are you doing here? Well, sorting mail, the mailroom, that kind of thing. So they encouraged me, and I took the examination. Then they said, and then of course it took months to process. By that time I was gone, and it was April of next year that where I was in my last post of Sapporo, that the letter came through, and I had passed the examination, except for the language portion. So that's what I mean. Do your homework. Find out what is in the milieu in which you're going to be operating, where you want to be, how do you get into it. I didn't do a thorough job at that time. I had a dream. Keep your eyes peeled for new opportunities. I was in Czechoslovakia, and the Czechs managed to declare 3/4 of us persona non grata. We had to leave within 10 days. We were sent to Germany. We were told to stay there. I thought, well, the Department of State, by that time I knew enough of the department, the government, and they weren't going to have, they didn't have 50 positions to send people to immediately. So I went to Paris. We weren't supposed to go to Paris. We were stay at Bad Homburg, wait for instructions. Well, I bent the instructions a little bit and went to Paris. And people said, in Bad Homburg, they said, hey, we're not supposed to go. I said, cover for me. So I went down to Paris, walked into the American embassy, walked up the personnel office, saw the man who was in charge, an old-timer, in the Foreign Service. And he said, and I explained myself to him. I've just been evacuated for Prague. I had qualifications of the Foreign Service. I had a master's degree, had a Navy commission. I had some French, and I thought I could be useful to him. So he kind of had a twinkle in his eye, and he said, I got all this down. You go back to Bad Hamburg and wait for instructions. And I waited for instructions, and a couple of days later, I had an assignment to Paris. And everybody said, how'd that come about? Well, I said, you know, little bird told me there was something there. But anyway, I went to Paris. And that's what I mean. Don't be afraid to seize the opportunity. Do it judiciously, do it properly, but seize the opportunity. That's the way you get ahead. While I was in Paris, happily, the war broke out in Korea, and I didn't think anything of it. But then toward the end of the year, in November 1st, 1950, I was suddenly received emergency orders to report to Seoul, Korea. So I was getting ready to go. My boss said to me, "That's a war zone, James." He was a veteran of World War I who had married a French woman and remained in France, and was working for the American Embassy. He was a high position at that time. And he said, "I have influence in Washington. I can get you out of that assignment if you want." Well, I knew that I was going to get a lot more pay in Seoul, for one thing. And I knew also from my experience in World War II, World War II, that promotions come faster on the battlefield. So I was very polite to him, and I said, "Thank you very much, Mr. Dagenhart. I would appreciate that. I appreciate your willingness to back me up and rescue me from the situation. But I said, I think that duty calls, I should go. That they were only asking for single men and bachelors. And so I said, I think I better take the assignment. And he said, "I understand." So it was risky, of course. So 10 days later, I was off to Seoul. It was a whole new world for me. I arrived there, and I saw the Korean people. I admired very much their fortitude and their courage under adversity. By that time, the ground was frozen in Korea. So they so I was fascinated by Asia, by Korea, and I was only there about 6 weeks. I was evacuated again before Christmas to Japan, and spent 4 months there before going up to Korea, up to Sapporo. But I read as much as I could, and I took a night course conducted by the Commander for Allied Powers, by people who were working for the Commander for Allied Powers, but it was a night course, and they taught night classes at that time. I learned the modern history of Asia, so I learned a great deal from that course. It was an introductory course, all my experiences in Japan, and self-reading in the libraries. And I was more and more fascinated, and by the time that I had finished in Tokyo, I decided that, and transferred to Sapporo, I decided that Chinese was the next language I wanted to study. but I still had to pass French for the examination requirements to limit. I'm often asked, which assignment did you enjoy the most? It's the first question that people are asked from overseas. Well, there were posts that I enjoyed. Taiwan was one. We went there soon after we graduated soon after we were married, 6 months, and we were there 5 years. And Taiwan was very isolated in 1957. So we enjoyed that. We enjoyed a long 5-year honeymoon by ourselves, and then with Anne and Teresa, our 2 eldest children. We were there 5 years, came back very happy with the experience. But the question to ask is, what is the assignment that taught you the most? And that was the one in Cambodia, where I was assigned to build up an embassy. I was suddenly assigned at the age of 27 by the man who was going to be the ambassador to Cambodia and who liked me, and I had worked for him as the deputy chief of mission in Saigon, way down the line, you know. But he saw something about my ability that he liked, and so he said, I know who I want for my administrative officer, Bill Cunningham. So off I went on the 1st of July to Phnom Penh, which I knew somewhat from her previous trips up there, to look the situation over. I found the American embassy consisted of 5 people in a pepper shop over a pepper shop, and they were crowded there. And I found I was going to have to find some place for people to at least work temporarily until we could get an embassy built. And there happened to be a French architect who was working on a 2-story building across town, in a good part of town, he has assured me that he could add 2 more floors, which we would require, to the building. So I began negotiating in French for this additional building. That was very good for my French. Meantime, my eligibility on the written examination had expired. You know how it is, those of you who looked in the Foreign Service. Anyway, it was a great experience to get that building built. I had to get English-speaking Cambodian employees. That was a challenge. After Cambodia had been under French domination for 90 years, they all spoke beautiful French, but there weren't any around who spoke English. So I was told to go over to Bangkok. It was a tip from my friend, and talk to Jim Thompson, who was the legendary OSS man during the war, had later established the Old Thai Silk Company and costumed The King and I, the Broadway show. So I talked to him, and he said, I explained my story and difficulty. He understood it because he'd been all through Southeast Asia during the war. And so he said, I think I can help you. Come to my house tomorrow afternoon, and at 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock, and I'll have somebody there talk to you. So I went home, went back to the hotel, did some other things Bangkok needed doing at the time, and then I went over to see him, and he said, he introduced me to the head of the Cambodian community in Bangkok. There was a small Cambodian community of very qualified people. And so I explained my situation to this man, and he listened and asked some questions, and finally he said, I can do this. I will help you get 15 people for various positions that you need, accountants and clerks and so on, with your needs. So I went back about 15, and about a month later, these people started showing up in Phnom Penh. So I had the English-speaking Cambodian staff, because English is the lingua franca in Bangkok, as many of you know. The last crisis, so the building got up, they were all ready to go, and the last hang-up was the backup generator in the building. So the local manager of the French electric company refused to authorize me to put it in, that is to say, to have it connected to the grid so that when the power went off in the city, this would automatically kick on. He said, no, your American standards don't meet our French standards. You're likely to blow up the whole city network grid. I can't allow it. So what was I going to do? I mean, this was just as the hot season was coming on. And it was about a week later that it actually hit. And so he said, you can come in and talk to the general manager from Paris tomorrow, who's going to be here. So, and all this conversation had been in French, you know. I came in the following day, talked to the general manager. He was a very nice man. This is where soft power counts. This is an example of soft power. He spoke English, general manager did, from Paris. And he listened to me carefully, and then he turned to the local manager in French and said, is this true? And the local manager said, well, sort of mumbled in his answer. And then he turned back to me and asked a few more questions. And he said, you people, you Americans helped us a lot. You're helping us now. And there is no technical difficulty here. I don't see why you can't be connected to this grid and the thing operate as you want. He said, go back and tell your ambassador it's okay. And he said, thank you for your help, France, for my country. I went back as fast as I could, tell the ambassador we were ready to go. We could start moving tomorrow. And so that was the last of the points. And that is what I learned every step of the way in Cambodia. I had a great deal of responsibility as a 28-year-old man, single man, to accomplish all these things within quickly, because more and more American officers were arriving. And by the middle of July, there were 95 in comparison to the 5 the previous year. So don't be afraid to take on the challenges. Think your way through. You have to think of you're on your feet. You have to think of solutions. but don't be afraid. The last example I'll mention is ping pong diplomacy, with which you're all familiar. In 1971, as I was getting ready to come home from Japan and planning a lovely trip for my family, in the afternoon, April 7th, I think, a phone call arrived from the press officer of the embassy. And he said, we've just learned that the Portuguese press agency, or no, the Italian press agency, has moved a story saying the American delegation in Tokyo and Nagoya, where the table tennis championships of the world was going on, the U.S. was doing badly, miserably, and was out of by then. He said, with the Chinese have invited the Americans to visit China, all expenses paid. So I said to him, well, Tom, I knew him very well. Tom was a co-religionist, member of my parish, of our parish. And so I said, Tom, tell him we know about it. He said, that's not enough. Oh, gotta say more. So I have remembered somewhere in the back of my mind, you know, by this time I was 20 years or so steeped in Chinese affairs. And I knew we were trying to make contact with the Chinese. And Henry Kissinger was conducting all of his diplomacy sub rosa behind the scenes. So I said, well, tell them we know about it, and tell them that if the American delegation decides to go to China, it's okay. Fine, he said, hung up. Then I started looking for some documentation to back me up, and I found a report of the administration to the Congress, from the President to the Congress, in January of the same year, saying the United States is open to cultural, educational, and athletic exchanges with the People's Republic of China, quote, unquote. Just about that time, the phone rang. It was Tom's boss, Alan Carter. And Alan said, don't you think you're going awfully far? I said, Alan, here's a statement from the President of the United States to the Congress of the United States, public document, government printing office. It's all over Washington. And it says, and I quoted, cultural, educational, and sporting exchanges with the People's Republic of China. And I said, you know, we said, well, you better talk to the ambassador. So I went down to the ambassador's office and walked in. The ambassador was just finishing a phone conversation. He said, all right, put out the press release. But why don't you ask them at the same time why they don't invite the Republic of China on Taiwan to, you know, I said, thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. Turned around, walked out of the office. He said, keep me posted. So, thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. And walked out of the office. And Armin Meyer, by the way, was a staunch anti-communist, you know, and he was legendary in the Foreign Service. So for him to say that was really a surprise. So I went back to my office and waited for future developments. And about 6 o'clock, 6:30, when the embassy was closing, suddenly there appeared in my office my colleague, Bob Immerman, and the other first secretary in the embassy, and he said, call this number. I said, what? He said, call the number. It's Nagoya. So I called the number, and I got Graham Steenhoven, who was the president of the U.S. Table Tennis Association. He said, thank God you called. I'm barricaded in my room. The team is on the outside. We've received an invitation to China. they want to go. I don't want to do anything that is against China policy. So I said, okay, Mr. Steve Hovind, I understand your situation. He said, I read him the statement. He said, you're telling me to go. I said, no, you're a free American citizen. You make up your own mind whether to go or not. I'm telling you that the United States government will put no barrier in your way if you want to go, but you have to decide. He said, I understand. I thank you for your call. And he said, I'll act accordingly. So then I called the ambassador and I said, let this development. The ambassador said, make it snappy, Bill, I'm going to a diplomatic reception. So I gave him the gist of my conversation, and he went off to his reception. He said, you better let Al Jenkins, who was the head of the China desk in Washington, know right away. Call him up. Open line, you know, who's going to be listening, so forth. Well, I did call him up. And Al Jenkins, finally, well, the Department of State Watch Office said, well, Mr. Cunningham, it's 3 o'clock in the morning in Washington. He's asleep in his, I said, the ambassador told me to call him. You know, this is a time where your authority is not enough. It has to be somebody higher, the ambassador. And so that name carries weight. So he connected me to the room, to the Bob Jenkins home out in Spring Valley. And I told him what had happened. I said, we just, you know, received this word. We told him that it's in compliance with U.S. policy and so forth. And he said, yawn, you know, took a long time to get the phone. He said, that sounds about right. Click. I thought, he doesn't understand what's happening, you know. Japanese are going to be all over the Department of State in a few hours when he's going to be going to work. But another of the story, you have to be ready for the unexpected. I had spent 20, 25 years studying China, studying our relations, been at Columbia University and studied and so I was all of that, all of the knowledge that you have at a particular moment, you've got to call on at the time to know what to do as the right thing. And you're taking a risk. Everybody in the embassy thought I'd taken a risk. They thought I'd ended my career. Well, I hadn't. But that was their feeling, you know, cautious, don't take risks. I've always been a risk taker, a cautious risk taker, or a risk taker that is where I'm sufficiently informed. I often said to the students, your predecessors, you haven't got time to go to the library or look it up on Wikipedia and get some more information. All the information in the world won't help you at that point. You've got to use your knowledge and your imagination. So rely on it and take a risk. It'll be all right. Now, I want to say something to the other advisors. I've talked about the terrible conditions of our foreign policy and how we are losing people. Hundreds of senior officers have resigned from the department, from the Foreign Service, gone into, and the number is growing every day. They're being ignored by the Secretary of State. I don't know what his reason is, but his being ignored by the people around him who should be advising him. They can't get in to brief him. That's the situation. And we're going to have to recover from this major disaster to soft power. And there's soft power examples all through my talk tonight. I'm going to close, so advisors, I thank you for your help and support for the International Studies program. I'm going to appeal for you to do a little bit more and to help our students who are coming up point out the various opportunities to them, make opportunities to them, for them if you can when they graduate. They need it in this confusing world, but they need it on a broad scale, as I said earlier. Now I'm going to close with a passage from Wolfgang Goethe, which was written by or excerpted for me by my daughter, Peggy, who is up in Denton, happens to be in town at the present time. And you'll meet her tonight because she's going to be at the dinner. Quote, I am still out of, until one is committed, there is hesitancy. There is a chance to draw back, always ineffectiveness. Concerning the acts of initiative and creation, there is out one elementary truth, the ignorance of which kills countless ideas and splendid plans, that the moment one definitely commits oneself, then providence moves to. All sorts of things occur to help one that never otherwise would have occurred. A whole stream of events and issues from the decision, raising in one's favor all manner of unforeseen incidents and meetings and materials, assist which no man could have dreamed of would have come all his way. Whatever you can do or dream you can, begin it. Boldness has genius, power, and magic in it. Begin it now. Thank you very much for listening so long to me ramble on here. It's been a pleasure to be with you. God bless you all. God bless the Center for International Studies. God bless our students. And I thank you very much for this evening's opportunity. Thank you.